Greetings, adventurers. Welcome to Miniature Legends, a place where even the smallest of figures can be legendary. I am Zaxitar, artisan wizard, and today I will be showing you how to paint up the miniatures in the Witcher Old World Monster Trail expansion. We will be going through everything step by step. How to prepare your miniatures for painting, prime them, and to paint them to a nice tabletop quality using the in-game artwork as a guide. Whether you're interested in replicating my methods, or merely looking for some painting inspiration, I will be showing my process today. There are chapter markers on the video and in the description, so feel free to skip around as you like. But first, if you're new here, some quick bookkeeping. I make videos on all things mini painting. If you're interested in the topic, or just looking for more Witcher Old World painting content specifically, please subscribe. I am planning on making tutorials on the entirety of Witcher Old World, and letting me know which miniatures you'd like to see from the set is very helpful for planning future videos. Perhaps the remaining player models and mages, or the Ciri expansion. Or would you like to see monsters from the Deluxe Edition? Something else? Please let me know with a message down below. With that out of the way, let's get to the Monster Trail, adventurers. I began by removing the model's mold lines. I highly recommend doing this, as it will help make your model look so much better once it has paint on it. I gave each miniature a wash in warm, soapy water and rinsed it under the tap. This helps avoid dust from the previous step from mixing with your primer, and also removes any mold release agent, or grease that might have accumulated from play. I gave each miniature a thin coat of black primer with my airbrush. Feel free to use any priming method. Brush on or rattle can is fine. The airbrush is merely what was most convenient to me. I affixed both models onto my makeshift painting handles, using an old medicine bottle and some poster putty. Then, I got to work with a quick dry brush of a bright white to pick out details. I intend to keep this tutorial easy for beginners, but if you feel up to using a zenithal highlight during this step, I would recommend it. Please note, before we begin painting, I will be listing the paints that I used in each step. However, I encourage you to substitute the paints that you have available. You do not need to purchase every paint seen in this tutorial. With that said, on to the painting. I began with the simpler model of the two to paint, the rock troll, starting with a coat of dark gray along the stony back and arms. Then, consulting the reference, I painted the belly, face, and undersides of the arms and legs with a yellow tan. I gave the base a quick coat of earthy brown, then, the mouth a coat of dark red. Realizing that the nose was also a dark red, I used the same paint to dot the nostrils. Next, I used a black gray for the dirty claws on the hands and feet. As this is a rock troll, I used the same dark gray on the scattered rocks across the base that I used for the body. Spotting a few bones, I gave them a base coat in a yellow off-white. I applied a brown wash across the entire model that I thinned with a bit of contrast medium. Should be about 3 parts wash to 1 part medium. Once the wash had time to dry, I got to work highlighting the skin with the same base tan color. I thinned the paint with a drop of water and built layers of tan on the darkened skin, trying to mimic how light would fall across the mini. Then, I got to work highlighting the stones with a mid-tone gray. Again, focusing on the upward-facing regions. I dotted the eyes with black before mixing up a glaze of orange-red that I thinned with water in about 4 parts water to 1 part paint. Keeping an eye on the reference, I moved the glaze across the skin to match. I came back in with a yellow off-white to lay around the teeth and bones. Then, I mixed up another glaze using a bright scarlet to build up thin layers around the jaw, belly, and legs. Using the same off-white, I picked out the claws on the hands and feet. Wanting the bones on the base to be a bit more grimy, I added a bit of thinned contrast paint to age the bones towards a more yellow tone. Then, a quick glaze of dark gray across the head, hands, and feet to blend the skin tones to the rock. Wanting a brighter highlight, I dry brushed a layer of bright gray on the upward facing stones. The miniature's face is usually a focal point, so I came back in with a bright scarlet to highlight the tongue. As a final touch on the eyes, I added a drop of bright white to add a specular highlight. Then, I mixed that white with some of the skin tone and water to add a series of final thin, glazy highlights across the troll's skin. This effect looks a bit strong when it's applied, but fades as the paint dries. And with that, I'm happy to call the rock troll done. Next, painting the Manticore Witcher. I applied a coat of dark warm brown to all the exposed skin on the head and arms. Then, I applied a coat of dark blue-gray to the exterior leather sections on the trousers and to the gauntlets. This is a bit hard to see, but the trousers are actually 2 different colors, so I painted the interior of the trouser leg a dark warm brown. I applied that same color to the chest, and then moved up the model, applying more dark blue-gray to the middle layer. A coat of pale brown for the top section of the leather chest piece. Then, a coat of dark cold brown for the hair and beard. I used the same color for the earth below. For the slain monster at his feet, I decided to deviate from the artwork slightly, going with a dark green shade instead of gray-black. The concept art is a dusk scene, and a black exoskeleton would be less eye-catching on the tabletop. I applied a coat of dark warm brown to the hilt and the sheath. And then a warm brown to the leather pouches, belts, and straps across the mini. For the metallics, I used a dark bronze for the shield. A cold, bright blue metallic for the drawn sword. And a dark steel metallic for the sheathed blade and exposed armor plates. I gave the entire miniature a coat of Agrex Earthshade, a dark brown wash, which I thinned with a 50-50 mix of contrast medium. Then, I gave the monster and the metallic sections a targeted wash of null oil with the same 50-50 mix of contrast medium. You'll have to forgive me, adventurers. This model went through several rounds of revisions as I struggled to decide how complex I wanted the skin painting to be. Wow, I ended up happy with the result. I redid the model's skin several times. So, to simplify through the tutorial, I ask you ignore these missing steps as we proceed, and I will go over my final, simplified method for painting skin later on. Back to the painting. I applied a rough layer of mid-tone brown to the hair, trying to focus on the raised areas. Eyes are often a matter of brush control, so please consider this optional, adventurers. But I layered the eye in black, then quickly dotted to the left and right sides of the eye in off-white. Finally, I came back in with my base skin tone and cleaned up any imperfections around the sides of the eye. Once I was done, I added a dark warm brown to the beard and built a highlight of the same mid-tone used in the hair. I spent some time using the base colors to clean up the effects from the wash on the armor and leather straps. I realized that I hadn't painted the monster claws. I added a layer of black, and then got to work picking out stones with a variety of warm tan colors. Here, I found a bone on the base, so I applied a layer of off-white. Then, I gave it a glaze of orange to blend it into the surroundings. Moving on to the metallics, I applied a layer to any sections that would be upward facing with the base color, picking out any studs, belt buckles, or clasps. Wanting a more dramatic shine to the shield, I applied a brighter brass metallic paint, trying to mimic the way that different sections would be more reflective in sunlight. As well as a quick touch-up to the medallion. This is my recommended, simplified method for painting this model's skin, starting with your dark brown base coat, then applying a layer of warm tan onto all the upward-facing sections, blending thin layers with the brown beneath. Then, coming back with a highlight of beige before blending these layers together with a thin, dark orange glaze. I hope that was simple and wasn't too disruptive to your process. Please let me know. I began applying a layer of dark forest green to the raised areas of the insect corpse. Then, I highlighted the insect's claws with neutral gray. I mixed a thin glaze of my bright brass to blend the transitions between the darker and lighter tones. Highlighting the leather's raised sections with a warm brown. As a final touch on the metallics, I used a bright silver to edge highlight the most raised sections, trying to amplify how light would form a specular highlight. A few final highlights on the hair, armor trim, and the claws, and I'm happy to call him complete. And that's how you paint Monster Trail. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please remember to leave a like or a comment with any feedback you'd be willing to share. The YouTube imp likes these things. If you're wanting more Witcher Old World content, I have a playlist linked on the top right. Or, if you want to see more of my work with miniatures, why not click on the video on the top left? I hope to see you again soon. Farewell, adventurers.